So there's a haiku by one of my favorite haiku poets, EQ, and he said, it's very simple, he has these like one-line haikus. Rain, snow, hail, ice. I love watching the river. That's it, okay? Rain, snow, hail, ice. I love watching the river. And you can imagine this monk sitting, like we sit in meditation, at the side of a river. I mean, I always have these images, right? He's like got his robes on, and they're made of cotton. It's raining, he goes out there and sits. Okay? It's snowing, he goes out there and sits. Hail? All right, same thing. How bad can it get? I love watching the river. Now, and sometimes the river is, he said, hail, rain, snow, ice. What do you mean, ice? It means that the river's frozen. At least that's what he sees, right? He doesn't see anything moving. It's just ice. I love watching the river. Right? Now, when we think about watching the river, we usually think, oh, I'm seeing, change, the flow, the flow of life. Until it seems like it's not flowing, and we're stuck. Right? I love watching the river. So this haiku is really kind of to the point of practicing with change. Right? The point of practicing with change. And it's not only about when you notice a change. It's even more specifically when you don't notice the change. Then how do you love watching the river? And that sense is, in a sense, we can look at it as a description, a really concise description of the practice of equanimity, which is just being with what is, open-heartedly, and fully embracing your reality as your enlightened way. He doesn't love it because it's comfortable, or because he likes it, or because he's masochistic, or whatever, or he likes being cold and wet and sick. No, it's not that. It's not that kind of love. And it's not the love because he's getting something personally out of it. It's because this is reality. This is my reality. Okay? And I need to embrace it. I need to accept this reality before I can know what to do. So much of our meditation practice is about that equanimity, which is saying, okay, what is this? Only then can you start mentally wondering and, going into a contemplative space of saying, okay, now that I know what it is, I can start working with it. Our meditation practice is before we start working with it. We first have to fully see it on its terms. That's real rain, snow, hail, ice. Okay, I love watching the river. I'm here to just see it as it is in every season. Right? If your mind is unclouded by disturbing thoughts, this is the best season of your life, best time of your life. Best is the same thing as him saying, I love watching the river. Now again, in this perspective of equanimity, this is the best season of your life, this is the best time of your life, I love watching the river. These statements, from an ordinary mind perspective, is like saying, yeah, I'm getting pleasure out of it. But from equanimity, it's not about personal pleasure. It's about our full loving embrace of reality. What does loving embrace mean? It's not a personal embrace of what I'm getting out of this personal relationship. It's a sense of, I accept it, and I fully accept it so deeply because it's not about me and my preferences. is about fully being with. And that fully being with, that connectedness, that interbeing, or what we say in Zen, emptiness, that fully being with, right, is what we call big mind or great love. It's not personal love, okay? And it's not impersonal love. Because if we were to say it's impersonal love, well, I don't know what the hell that is. Like, what is impersonal love, right? I don't know. Okay, but it's big love, okay? Meaning it's not about my personal self and what I get out of it and what pleasure and like benefit I get out of it. But the big love is the sense that, the whole world is my responsibility. Like, I care for it all, because it's a part of me and I'm a part of it, and we're one. And it's sort of like this whole interbeing, which is like saying, if I'm going to love myself, I can't ignore my little toe. I mean, it's part of it. I have to also care for the toe, right? Or the, big toe, or the knee, or whatever part, right? So our embrace of the wholeness of it, I love watching the river. This is the best season of your life. These are statements from that equanimity, which is not indifferent and impersonal. Because if it's really big mind, it also includes the personal, but not only, right? To say it transcends the personal or transcends the ego does not mean it denies the ego and denies the personality. It means it includes it, but so much more. Your sense of who and what you are in this world is greater than just me and mine, okay? And my own personal conditions. Our mission here is to get beyond that, but not to exclude it. To include it, but go beyond. Keep going beyond, right? Go beyond your comfort level, right? Don't limit yourself. That's what, I love watching the river is. It's like, can you watch it even when it's ice? You don't see anything, right? There's nothing moving. But from big mind, and from what we say great faith in Zen, one of the pillars of Zen, that great faith, you know that underneath the ice, that under what I can personally see, there's flow. There's change. And even when it's totally iced up, okay, the seasons are still changing. Spring is coming, right? Things are moving. And it's not dependent on my personal point of view of being able to see it moving. But the great faith is, I know this is moving, and I'm going to help it. I'm going to help it in any way I can. But before I can make any change, I sit and I watch, right? Rain, snow, hail, ice. I love watching the river. Okay, in our meditation practice, in our Buddhist practice, in our Dharma practice, in our enlightened way, whatever you want to call it, okay, we first spend a lot of time sitting by the river, right, and observing, okay, all the change. Another few haikus I want to share with you. This is also from Ikkyu. And I'm using Ikkyu because he is a master haikuist in expressing the unity of the personal and the total. Okay? And that is really what we want to understand in terms of the unity of what seem like opposites here. That sometimes we feel, okay, how can I have a self, a sense of self, and also be non-self? How can I, really enjoy my present and see it change and not become sort of jaded and think that it doesn't matter? Right? How do I hold those seeming opposites together? How do I see the unity in what seems like contradictions? Okay? And we see that in our lives also. How can I feel like one person when sometimes I feel loving and sometimes I feel really like just angry or judgmental or, how can I have joy and also have deep sadness and despair? How can I hold that together? right? Walt Whitman, in, Song to Myself, he said, I contain multitudes, It's not a contradiction. You contain universes. How can you understand that, embrace that in yourself, right? It's not by seeing the unity all the time. It's not by saying, okay, I am this globe. No. But can you accept that sadness in this moment, right? When EQ was sitting by the river, he didn't see the rain, snow, hail, and ice all at once. There was time when we sat and it was rain. Other times it was ice. Okay? Different times, different realities. Together it's one for him. Right? So, how do you express the unity? By accepting this particular experience. This specific experience. Right? And then the next one, that specific one. Not trying to force it to some type of, middle way. No. You will experience extremes in your life. Right? That's what you're experiencing. Can you be with that? And underneath it, see the flow. Under the ice, see the flow. Under the snow, you see the river. Right? I love sitting by the river. It doesn't mean you're going to like it. Okay? Loving the river and liking the river are not the same thing. The love is something much bigger than our personal sense of liking. At times you may hate the river that you're sitting by, but can you still love it? Hate and like don't work together. But the love I'm talking about here is that great embrace of more than what you think you are. You can include these seeming opposites. Okay? And once you see that who you are is much bigger than who you think you are, then a little bit of the fear can be taken away. You don't need to be afraid of being afraid. You don't need to be afraid of being angry, because you're not going to identify your whole self by that. You know that it's part of this whole bigness that includes these seeming opposites of being sometimes angry, sometimes ice, sometimes snow, sometimes rain. I'm sure you also saw it in times when it was sunny. But that's not so helpful for us. Like, it's nice to read a poem about sitting by the river on a sunny day. But that's not a haiku. For a haiku, meaning to help our practice, it has to be ice. Okay? And rain, and snow, and hail. Right? Because real practice happens when it's uncomfortable. There's the joy. And that's great. Right? But the real challenge, okay, is when things fall apart. Or when it's so cold or so hot, you don't know what to do. That's this famous koan where one of the students went to the master and asked, okay, how do you practice in a place when it's so cold? And it was like a freezing monastery where they didn't have any central heating. Okay? Wintertime, northern Japan. Cold, like really cold. And he said, go to a place where it's not cold. Well, the whole place is cold. How do I go to a place not cold? So of course he asks, well, where is that? Okay? Where is the place that's not cold? And the master says, let it be so cold that the cold kills you. That's what he said. that was the response. Like, what? That's what this practice is about? Yeah, of course. Okay, of course. You kill the small sense of self where you say, like and don't like. I can practice with this, I can't practice with that. This is not my practice, this is too much for me. Right? Where did those ideas come from? And when did you start believing them so strongly? Kill that. That's what he's saying. Okay? Let the cold kill some of the ideas of what you have about yourself. And when he's saying cold, he means just like something that is not just the air conditioner. Okay? For some people, it's the air conditioner. For some people, it's your sadness, your fear, okay? Your restlessness, your judgment, okay? Your ideas of yourself, your failings, right? Your sense of failure, all this, okay? That's the cold. That's the ice. That's the snow. That's the hail, right? So he's saying, let that freeze you so much, it kills you. It kills your belief that this is stopping you practicing, that this is limiting your mind. That belief, okay, is false. A false belief. What we call one of the first step in the 12 links of dependent co-arising in these whatever Buddhist ideas is ignorance. It's called ignorance, okay? Ignorance means not knowing, right? And when you believe something strongly about who you are, that it limits you, okay, it means you're not knowing something bigger. It doesn't mean you can't have that sense of self, but you're not limited by that sense of self. Non-self doesn't mean you don't have self. It means you're not limited by that sense of self. And the sense of self can be more dynamic, and you understand that underneath the ice, there's flow and change, okay, happening all the time. That is, let that cold kill you. Right? See underneath the ice, okay, where your heart is frozen, and know that there's flow going on, especially when you don't notice it. Right? Or, as we would say in the Buddhist terminology, when you are ignorant of that. Right? Trungpa Rinpoche put it this way, and I love his quote here, and I always want to share it. He said, when things start to fall apart in our life, you feel as if your whole life is crumbling. But actually, it's your fixed identity that is crumbling. And that's a cause for celebration. Woohoo! I feel like dying. I want to give up. I should start celebrating that fact. Yes, you should give up. You should give up your attachment to who and what you think you are. Yeah?
Economists have a saying, never waste a good crisis.
Yeah, for sure. Seems like they wasted a lot, though. But they should take their own practice seriously, right? Yeah. Maybe next crisis they'll get it right. So when we feel like who and what we are is not who and what we want to be, but we failed, or we've made the same mistakes over and over again, or we're just, unhappy. Common experience. Not that it's all so bad and negative, okay, but there is serious dukkha. There is serious suffering going on. And when we encounter suffering in any form, we have to understand that the reason the Buddha taught suffering as the first noble truth is it sets us on the path. And that's why Trungpa Rinpoche says it's a cause for celebration. What a weird approach, eh? I mean, it's so counterintuitive to what we think about dealing with crisis, suffering, pain, grief, anger, whatever it is, the whole gamut, the whole, catastrophe, right? Being human. The dukkha that's inherent in birth, aging, sickness, and death. Those 4 biggies, right? That we are just experiencing all the time. Yeah. Birth, happy birthday. I'm not going to go there right now, but happy birthday. I mean, you're born, but you're not just born once. It seems like we're born again and again, And it keeps getting, it's just as painful. I mean, you came out crying, another change happens, and you cry, there's another crisis. You feel like change, even when the change is good, it still is painful, right? You move to a new place, or you graduate, get a new job, it's still scary. I mean, why can't there be good change that's actually fun? Dukkha. Okay, all change is difficult. All change across the board. But that is what sets us on the path. If there weren't any friction and conflict inherent in change, we would just see the ice and we wouldn't see the flow under the ice. We would sit by the river and just look at the ice and think that's it. But the dukkha inherent in change makes us look deeper. Suffering adds depth to our practice because it gives us purpose. And the purpose is we want to help. We want to end suffering and increase happiness in a deep and a true way. And suffering keeps letting us know there is more work to be done. Okay, not as a judgment, bad, but as a reality, as a commitment, as a vow. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Okay? And anytime we encounter suffering, it can renew our vow to be on this path of awakening. That is the purpose of suffering. That is why it is noble. Okay? It ennobles our sense of self so that we're not just selfish, but rather it expands us to include all the suffering that's in this world. That is why it is a noble truth. And that is why it is a cause, as Trungpa Rinpoche says, of celebration. Okay? Anytime you feel crisis, anytime you feel despair, anytime you feel pain, in any way, it is freeing you, potentially, if you choose, from your limitations. Okay? Of who and what you are. Who and what you think you are. Because the reason it's painful is from an idea I had previously that this shouldn't be happening. Okay, this should not be happening to me. This just shouldn't be happening. I thought I was over this already. Celebrate. There's more to be done. So what did EQ write? Here's his other haiku that I wanted to share with you. There's a couple. My friend's funeral this morning burns inside of me like my own death. My friend's funeral this morning burns inside of me like my own death. It's interesting the way EQ uses these words, right? I mean, once he's talking about ice, and the next one is like his funeral where, you wouldn't usually think that when a life goes out, it becomes cold. The world is a colder place. But it's exactly the opposite for him. It's like it burns inside of me, maybe because they burn the bodies, right? So, that burning was still inside of him. But mainly the sorrow, the grief, the pain, the sadness. Type of passion. Okay, it is a type of passion. Right? A strong feeling, I just mean. Passion as a strong, strong feeling. Pain. And he's not denying that at all. At all. So being on the path and having some enlightenment does not mean that your friend's funeral, your friend's death, will not burn inside of you. In fact, it will burn inside of you. And you can open your heart fully to that. You can embrace that reality and not be afraid of it. It's not a failure that you feel pain, grief, anger, upset, whatever it is that you're experiencing. That's not a failure of your enlightened mind. But to judge yourself and limit yourself and define yourself by that is ignorance. To know that who and what you are is a flow that is not defined by any one moment when you try to stop the river and say, this is the river. And that's why he can write this haiku and say, like, hey, I've been practicing all my life. I'm a monk and I'm, a celebrated haiku poet, and my friend's funeral burns inside of me like my own death. I can embrace this grief so much and not be afraid of it Why? Why is EQ so candid, so sincere with his own pain and dukkha? You would think that an enlightened master would be able to say, peace. Or, it's all, equanimity, like I just accept it. And he's like, no, I feel like I just died. Okay? Birth, aging, sickness, death, right? Happening all the time. Because of what the Buddha taught at the end of his life. When he was asked for the summary of the teachings, and Suzuki Roshi summarized it this way. Someone asked Suzuki Roshi, and it's just paraphrasing the Buddha at the end of his life, could you summarize the teachings? And he said, yeah, everything changes. The river under the ice. Okay? In the dead of winter, spring is approaching. And in the middle of spring, look out for autumn. It's never going to stop. Basho had another haiku where he said, the first day of spring. I keep thinking about the end of autumn. That was his haiku, which also very perfectly and succinctly summarizes that understanding. Wherever you are is true and complete in itself and changing. That is not a contradiction, that you have full presence and change. Conceptually, it seems like I can't make it work. How can I be totally present and at the same time this present is going? Where am I? Am I past or present or maybe future? Which is it? That's just the tricks of the thinking mind. Trying to bring in concepts and make them fit. They don't fit as a concept. They fit seamlessly as an experience. You have to trust your experience. Trust what you observe, what you touch, what you feel, what you taste, what you breathe. Trust that. Trust the fact that you breathe in, you breathe out, you're fully with your breath, but the breath is passing as you are with it. Okay? The river is flowing as I sit with it. The present is passing in this very moment. Does that not make it present? No. Does it make it not passing? No. What is there to think about? Observe. We come back and we trust our ability to be with the present and to see it pass. And in that deep understanding of the unity of present and impermanence, that unity. Can you imagine if the present were not impermanent? Well, first of all, we wouldn't be having this talk. I mean, I don't think I could open my mouth. But it's just impossible. Change is the truth, the deepest truth, and the most superficial truth. It's the complete truth. It's surface and depth at the same time, which are not a conflict. In the same way that present and passing are not a conflict. You hold it all together in this very moment. Trust your experience. Trust your ability to be with it and sit with it. And then, whatever you experience, and this is the truth of EQ's wisdom, he can be fully with the grief of his friend's death. And he can know that that grief, in the moment of experiencing it, is at the same time passing. The fearlessness comes from fully appreciating the impermanence of every experience. It doesn't make us indifferent. It makes us less fearful, even of the fear. Don't be afraid of fear. You can experience fear too, completely. But it takes the fear out of the fear. It takes the fear out of the anxiety or the sadness or whatever it is that we think is, I shouldn't be experiencing this because what happened to meditation? I thought I had equanimity. Equanimity does not mean you're not feeling very deeply and strongly, like you're just sort of, I don't know what, you know. That's called indifference, like not caring. That's shutting down. We want to open. And that openness is vulnerability. And that vulnerability is only possible when you fully appreciate the nature of change. Because otherwise, it's too much. What if I'm going to be vulnerable to won't change? Now that's scary. Okay? If like the grief, the sadness, the anger, the despair, or even the joy, if it were to not change, wow, of course I'm not going to touch it. The truth of impermanence, and this is why the Buddha emphasized it at the end of his life, his last teaching was, all conditioned phenomena passes or changes. As Roshi said, everything changes. Okay, everything. And that everything is a great liberation. Because if it didn't, whoa, you know, forget it. Change is a cause for celebration. And celebration does not mean, in Rinpoche's words, that you are singing and dancing and having a birthday party. Celebration here means I feel greater freedom. Okay, I have more space in my heart and in my mind to be here because I am not defined by this limited experience. And I'm not defined by it because I see it changing. And anything that changes can, by definition, not define me because it's changing. So which one is it? And that's the truth of sitting by the river. And that's why he can be happy. Because he sits by the river, and whether it's snow or rain or hail or even ice, he knows it doesn't define the river and it doesn't define me. So that's why I can actually be happy watching the river. Because in watching it, I'm aware of that truth of change and impermanence, which allows me to be as big as all the change happening, to be undefined, or as the original teachings say, to realize my unconditioned mind. Right? Change and impermanence, and watching closely that process in your moment-to-moment life is a gateway to freedom. Freedom to just be without being anything specific. As soon as you specify, you have limited. And when you're limited, you will find things that don't fit that definition. And when things don't fit that definition, it causes conflict. And then you're going to experience pain. You want to be free from suffering, you have to deeply internalize, experientially and existentially, in your wise mind, the truth of impermanence. And that is why it is the beginning and the end of the teaching in the Buddha Dharma, and that is exactly what we do in meditation. We sit and we watch the flow of our own lives. Sit by the river. And enjoy the show. Please.
So this practice and I guess the acceptance of death and impermanence shouldn't lead to less grief when a friend dies?
Maybe it'll lead to more grief. Why not? Should it lead to less grief if a friend dies? The understanding, the practice of impermanence. Well, if we take EQ's example, no. In fact, he felt so much grief, he felt like he was dying. He felt like it was his own death. And most people are afraid of death more than anything else. So He actually experienced so strongly. But what is that teaching us? It's teaching us that it's because of impermanence that he allowed himself to fully experience the grief without being afraid of it, because he knew the grief would pass. He knew even the most difficult experience is impermanent, and therefore he could open fully to it. So it'll allow you, enable you to fully experience whatever you experience. And you allow yourself that because you know that it'll change. So there's less fear in the most difficult thing. So, in fact, I think we will be less defensive because we understand that even the worst thing that can happen also passes. And the best thing too. So you appreciate the greatness and you have a little less defensiveness against the worst. For the same reason, it's all going to pass. So enjoy what you have and be less afraid of what you don't like because of the same reason. So I think impermanence actually, and deeply understanding that, will help us, in fact, accept our feelings more. Okay? Yeah.
I feel that it doesn't really pass. If you grieve the death of someone that's close to you, the grief changes, but it never passes. This is what I think.
Yeah. No, that's an important point.
You feel different each time, but it will always be there.
Yeah. Yeah, the acceptance is not for the sake of making it go away. Well, what we're trying to, because that's kind of, approaching impermanence with like an agenda. Like I have an agenda. The agenda is I'm not going to feel this. No. So what you're saying is important. It doesn't necessarily, it's not like a cure, because a cure is saying that there's a problem. The grief isn't the problem. That's not the problem, But our aversion to the grief is a problem, So the acceptance of the change allows us to more closely be with that experience. So yeah, it's going to change. Does that mean go away? Not necessarily. Does it mean stay? Not necessarily. You wanted to ask? Who had a question? Someone else?
I had. The word suffering confuses me because like I'm still going to suffer. Suffering is not going to end in the sense that in the regular meaning of the word suffering for me, like strong emotions that are hard to take and that you have a strong natural aversion to. So that's not going anywhere.
Yeah. So can you say something about how you're using this word in the sense that it will go away? What will go away? Yeah. What will go away is a sense of self that is defined by these emotions and by these reactions. What will start to fade or perhaps be less, you could say solid, is that I'm a good person because I'm feeling happy. I'm a bad person because I'm angry. Or, this self-definition that is so related or predicated upon these experiences, that we often build a sense of self out of these, emotions we have, so that then we start to believe the story, right? That, I'm a good person, or, I'm a generally happy person, or I'm a generally unhappy person. And if you make I am, then it's kind of like stuck. It's just ice. And we're not seeing under the ice. I keep going back to this haiku. Like, we're just seeing the ice, but we're not seeing the river under. So if you're only seeing ice, it's because you're defining yourself very, solidly. You're freezing the flow based on a very limited, definition. Some habits you have, right? Do you really want to be defined by those habits? I mean, come on. If we were to define ourselves by our kind of emotional lives, that would be not the happiest camper, right? So if we can... Huh?
Crazy person.
A crazy person. Each one of us crazy or depressed or angry or impatient or, I don't know, like whatever, or egotistical or proud or better than others or worse than others or whatever, These stories, okay? What if you were to start now? What kind of story would you want to write? Can we... So, again, back to the question, what do I do with the fact that these emotions and thoughts keep, yes, coming back and causing me pain, suffering, okay?
I just wanted to say that there's a very famous Nisargadatta Maharaj that wrote the book I Am That, who talks about, relating to what you said, that suffering is really a lack. He said, we're not experiencing suffering, we're suffering our experience by wanting that to be other than what it is.
Yeah. So, the Buddha talked about also like these two eras, okay? So the era of your suffering, the pain you have, okay? And then the other arrow that either you put into it, like right on the same spot, trying to get it out, or the fact that, you're choosing to analyze that arrow and say, like, where did it come from, and, who made the arrow, and what kind of feathers are on it, and all the time you got this arrow stuck in you, and you're actually trying to analyze this arrow, instead of saying, okay, well, wait a second. So what is the arrow? Okay, the pain and the suffering are all the afflictive emotions, we call. The afflictive emotions are, the hindrances that we have in terms of, basically there's emotions that are based on desire, like, attraction and aversion, okay? And the attraction and aversion comes down to also like wanting sensual pleasure, like hot or cold, let's say, hungry, tired, whatever, thorn in my foot, want to get a thorn out, all those sensual pleasure. Having ill will, the 5 hindrances, being angry, being restless, feeling dull and unmotivated, and doubting everything, especially myself, okay, or the teachings. So those are the 5 hindrances, in short. And those are called afflictive emotions. You hook them up with attachment and aversion and delusion, and it's a pretty poisonous brew, okay? So it's a pretty bad mix. And what that does is a poisonous arrow, okay? You experience that, right? And you're not going to say, I'm not experiencing it. Or if I say that I shouldn't be experiencing it, then what do you have? Not only do you have your experience, you have the judgment of the experience, which is the sense of looking at this arrow and saying, You're like, it hurts a lot more because you're kind of playing around with this arrow. So what do? What do you do? Okay? What do you do is what we've been talking about here, and what we will continue talking about, is can you open a vulnerable place for that suffering and actually care for it? That's why he says, I love watching the river. Can you love watching the river of your own suffering? I know that sounds crazy, right? But it is crazy. Because it's saying that the suffering isn't the problem. That's what it's saying. The suffering isn't the problem. We look at our minds and we think again and again, because I'm angry or grieving or judgmental or whatever, that's the problem I need to change. Right? I need to change that in my mind, then I'll be like a healthier person, more balanced. Right? Yeah. Okay? But here, what we're trying to understand in our meditation practice is there's nothing to change that you need to actively change. But you can become more free by simply observing the nature of change in those very emotions and suffering that you experience. Okay? Understand not the surface of it, understand the truth of it, which is impermanence. So what do we do when we encounter suffering? We try to understand also the nature of impermanence in that very experience. And that will allow us to fully sit with it by that river and love it. Love it doesn't mean I like it. It just means I appreciate this as my awakened practice. This is my enlightened practice. I'm sitting with this pain, despair, suffering, lack, whatever it is. Okay? Because it is my teacher. And it is teaching me not how to deal with pain, it is teaching me about the truth of impermanence. That even the most difficult thing, if I look closely, is changing under my nose. It's changing as I look at it. Even when the river is frozen over, you sit with that river. Okay? So that's why suffering, okay, is actually samsara and nirvana, we say, are really one. So the suffering and enlightenment are one practice. It doesn't mean you should want suffering. But in this realm of dukkha, suffering is your teacher. Okay? It is your teacher telling you exactly what needs attention. And if you suddenly react with aversion, okay, then what happens is you miss the lesson. And the lesson, folks, is always one thing. Change. Now, I know it sounds so simple and facile to say, but if we really, really internalize that as how we understand life, it is liberating. So, and it's not just by repeating it over and over again, as I tend to do, but it's by really looking deeply into the nature of your experience, especially the places that scare you, and seeing in there the flowing river.
I have another question. So I understand that through practice we less identify, we don't make our feelings and experiences us, ourselves, but what if people very close to us, like friends and family, who do these calculations, who say, for example, oh, she's a crazy person, oh, she's mad, she is sad, she's depressed, and they make their relationship conditional based on that. How do we practice with this?
Yeah. Well, family's hard, but so is everybody. Everybody's hard, because everybody's living according to basically false beliefs. That's the truth. Is that, we're all running around. That's why in the Dharma they talk about the world being illusion, right? It doesn't mean it's not real. Like, it feels real to me. It just means my ideas about it are mostly false. Okay. Well, false. Why? Because they're limited, and I take them as true. If I can see my ideas as, possible, Suzuki Roshi says, that may be so, but not necessarily so. If I can say that might be, but not necessarily. So the idea I have about somebody else. Now, if they have that idea about you, okay, what's really important is the idea you have about yourself. Right? You can't change them. But your ideas, you can change. So it's your ideas. And what we're working on is trying a little bit less to have such a strong belief in our own ideas. Of course, that goes without saying, having a little less strong belief in other people's ideas. Because other people's ideas are not built on so much better information. Okay, it just happens to be theirs. but they project them, so we feel like we have to live up to their expectations because we're in a relationship with them. So, parents, friends, spouse, whatever. Yeah, it's doomed. It's doomed to failure. Okay. But you can be aware again when you confront and feel exposed to other people's ideas of who you are and who you should be, okay, and their definitions. You can be aware of the suffering it creates inside of you. That's what you can be aware of. And how it closes your heart and limits you. And by looking at that deeply, that experience, okay, you can then hear those opinions with a little less fear. Because you familiarize yourself, again, with that experience. Oh yeah, it's making me closed, it's making me sad, it's making me also react to those expectations. That's why we act the same way with old family. Because all of a sudden we just immediately, And that's also not a failure. That's just patterns of habit, mental habit, that then sometimes you're not even going to be able to be aware of it while it's happening. But you can sit afterwards, and you can, let that come up, right? Sometimes sitting by the river doesn't happen when you're sitting at the river. Sometimes sitting and observing the river happens when you're not sitting with the river. Do you know what I mean? Okay? So when you're out of that kind of dangerous area, then sometimes you can sit with the river. Okay? Sometimes you can't sit with the river when you're at the river. All right? But no matter what, at some point you'll be sitting with the river. In the hill.
אני רוצה לשאול שאלה על הסבל, אבל אין זמן, נכון? אין זמן לסבול את הסבל היום.
It depends. I mean, you can ask whatever. I don't have to say anything. Go ahead, Batya.
אני מבינה יותר כשמדובר על שינוי עמדות, כמו שאת דיברת.
I don't speak Hebrew, so...
די, אז כולם תלמדו עברית. אנחנו בארץ ישראל.
That's a strong opinion. Strong opinion.
טוב, אז עכשיו אני אשאל אותך. הגברת הנכבדה דיברה על עניין של עמדות, ובעניין הזה זה יותר ברור לי. כשאתה מדבר על האיש שהחבר הכי טוב שלו נפטר, אוקיי? והוא הרגיש שהוא מת יחד איתו. אוקיי? זה פיור סבל, זה לא עניין של עמדות או קונדישן, זה כאב. זה כאב. עכשיו, אם אני מרגישה את הכאב מאוד חזק, ברגע שאני מבינה שזה זמני וזה יחלוף, זה אף פעם לא יסתיים, אבל זה יעבור גלגולים, כי הכאב עובר גלגולים. דניאל, אתה מבין אותי?
Yeah, totally.
הכאב עובר גלגולים. הכאב החזק מאוד, ברגע שאני יודעת שהוא זמני, זה בעצם בלשון מערבית, אוקיי? לא בודהיסטי, זה איזשהו מנגנון הגנה. נכון?
זה
איזשהו מנגנון הגנה. ברגע שאני יודעת שהכאב הנוראי הזה יחלוף, זה שומר עליי. זה גם מונע ממני להרגיש את הסבל עד הסוף, כי זה הגנה. נכון? כאילו יש לי איזה כדור כאן, והוא כואב לי, שורף. אני יכולה לשאת את השריפה הזאת, כי אני יודעת שהוא כבר יהיה פה. מחר, עוד רגע, ועוד פעם, נכון? הרעיון הוא שהזמניות, Impermanence, זה מנגנון הגנה, זה שומר עליי, זה בלשון מערבית.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the question. Is it good? Okay. I understand that. No, I think there's one thing that's different a little bit in the description between what you described and then what I think EQ and some of the teachers are doing here in understanding impermanence, like deeply. It's not that you have this suffering and I can deal with it because I know later on, I know it's going to change. That's intellectual and that doesn't always help. That sort of conceptual or intellectual understanding, yes, it'll change, is not going to help with my pain right now. That's kind of like this hope that, yeah, it'll change. Come on, it'll change. No.
לא, אבל כשאתה יודע שמשהו זמני, זה בדרך כלל מאוד עוזר. האינטלקטואל ידיעה הזאת היא עוזרת.
A little, maybe. 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 Yeah, maybe not. But here, it's something different. The practice here is not that this will pass. The practice here is that it's passing as I look at it. There's a difference. Is that the present and impermanence are one experience. It's not that it will pass in the future. It is not about the future. It is about the present and fully being so engaged in the present that I am noticing the change as I watch it. Okay? And we don't start with the death of a friend or a loved one. That's not where we start. No. We start with something like my ankle's hurting or my back. Okay? We start with something like that. My feet are asleep. Okay.
איפה נמצאת הידיעה של הארעיות, של האימפרמננס? איפה היא נמצאת בכל התמונה הזאת? כשאני חווה את הסבל הקשה, איפה אצלי נמצא האימפרמננס הזה שאתה כל הזמן מדבר עליו?
In what you observe. It's where you observe the change. You observe what you're looking at. Whatever you look at, if you look closely enough, even if it looks like ice, even if it looks like stuck, if you look closely, and this is the truth of our meditation practice, whatever you look at closely enough, you will see that as you look, it is changing. That what you thought previously, what you thought before was solid, is not solid. Okay? No matter how difficult it is. If it's pain that's physical or if it's pain that's emotional, when you look closely, you will see the change of its nature. Right? And I don't mean dramatic change. I just mean enough that you start to investigate. You start to ask the question, is it really, after a while of observing, you start to ask the question, is this really what I thought it was? Because if I do, even in the most difficult places, notice change, then maybe my ideas are not totally accurate. Now, I'm saying not starting with the grief of a loved one. Start with, okay, next time you feel some pain, next time you feel some hunger, some desire, something, next time you feel anything or a thought, what happens when I start to when I take that as my focus? Instead of the breath as my focus, I take that very experience as my focus. And that's why dukkha, suffering, leads to enlightenment. Because it becomes my focus that awakens my understanding of impermanence. You will see impermanence change in the dukkha, in the suffering. Suffering is our gateway to understanding change. And change is the door to freedom. That's all I want to say. Okay, sorry. But yeah, I know, again, this is not a mental exercise. Do not say it will pass in the future. It is passing now. It is passing now. And that is the urgency, the importance of our practice, is to really fully appreciate that what you love is passing now. Therefore, pay attention. And what you hate is passing now. Therefore, don't be afraid of it. Okay?
Perhaps you can look at it that you're not projecting, and the act of engaging, of looking, engages you in the present. Because projection implies it may get better in the future.
Yeah.
It won't.
And it won't necessarily get worse. It'll be different. Yeah.
But it can never be known, so don't project. It's just, you know, by looking, you're being brought into the present. Simple.
Yeah. Simple and difficult. Simple and difficult. Because we want to hold on to our hopes. Right now, as Trungpa Rinpoche also said, whether you take this as good news or bad news, he said, this practice is hopeless. And you can understand that any way you want.
Can I say just one
Yeah.
תגיד לנו את זה במוצאי שבת, את ההופלס.
I'm reading now a book which I highly recommend it, and it's an interesting title, A Tale for the Time Being. And the time being is a definition of a human being. Which is, you have to make a switch in your head. Instead of saying a human being, say a time being. Being as a being.
Yeah.
So it's really it's an interesting relationship with time.
Yeah.
Humans.
So I want to end now. We have to end. I mean, this conversation will never end. And that means we will continue practicing. But the talk can end. The conversation will not end. The talk will end.
Good news.
Thanks. I won't take that personally. Jesus.
No.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. You better give some extra Dana for that. Oh yeah, blame. That's classic. All right. Now I will end with one more haiku by EQ, who just talked about his friend's death. And what is another haiku he gave us? A good world. The dewdrops fall by ones, by twos. A good world. The dewdrops fall by ones, by twos. You know, it's a good world. It's a good world. You know? But the dewdrops fall. Okay? Sometimes by yourself, sometimes with someone else. Right? It's going to fall, but that doesn't make it a not good world. It's a good world, and it includes the dewdrops falling. May we practice with sincerity and freedom and realize the Buddha way together.